What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtonette. Joining you guys again after a little bit of time away. It was kind of nice to get a little bit of a break. Obviously, there were a few things to go over that happened since my last video, which was reacting to Conference Championship weekend and the College Football Playoff bracket. But in this video, I'm going to talk about some of those things that I missed, but obviously the main priority is going to be talking about the College Football Playoff, previewing the first round, and giving my predictions for how the bracket will shake out. But before I get into it, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. First of all, though, the game that is always deserving of kind of a lot of attention, for a week, the most attention, is the Army-Navy game. This year, Navy beat Army in what was, of course, a pretty classic Army-Navy game, a defensive clash. Navy wins 17-16, going ahead with about 6.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter on a pass from Blake Horvath to Eli Heidenreich. That's been a combination that has worked for the midshipmen really for the last couple of years. It's been an incredibly strong connection, and the midshipmen behind that were able to come back and get their second straight win in the series. In the FCS semifinals, or I guess in the quarterfinals, the semifinals are now set. Montana is facing off against Montana State, and then Illinois State is against Villanova. Real quickly, going over those games, the first meeting between Montana and Montana State in the Brawl of the Wild was a pretty good game. Montana State got a big pick six, I think, from Caden Lawson. They kind of shifted momentum in their favor. They were able to go ahead by 10 with about 4 to 5 minutes left in that game. And then they were able to hold on in spite of Montana making a little bit of a push at the end. I think this time around, though, if Montana can kind of avoid that key turnover, I think they're going to get the win here. I'm going to go with Montana. And then Illinois State, the Redbirds are just flying high on an incredible journey. I think they get a win over Villanova. And also, how about that matchup? Brawl of the Wild for a spot in the FCS National Championship game. And then you've also got kind of two teams that have kind of gone under the radar this season, especially Illinois State. I mean, they got drilled 37-7 by Southern Illinois, and yet here they are in the FCS semifinals, one win away from the national championship game. And kudos to Villanova. You know, they're one of those East Coast football teams that kind of goes a little bit under the radar, but they have had an incredible season as well. Also, Fernando Mendoza won the Heisman Trophy over Diego Pavia, Julian Sain, and Jeremiah Love. Those are the other three finalists for the Heisman Trophy. I think it's probably deserving. I mean, really, the Heisman Trophy should go to the most important player or the best player on the best team. And as of right now, 13-0, Big Ten champions, number one in the country. Indiana is certainly proving to be that. So those are kind of my thoughts on those, and also the way that it was handled by Pavia shows me that maybe he wasn't deserving to win the award anyways. But moving on from that, talking about these first-round college football playoff games, we've got number 9 Alabama at number 8 Oklahoma. The Crimson Tide are 10-3. They were the runner-up in the SEC, and then Oklahoma finished 10-2. This is a rematch of a 23-21 Sooners win earlier this season. This is a case of, I think, two really good or certainly above-average defenses. OU ranking number 1 in the SEC and really across the board versus two pretty average offenses. Now, I kind of want to talk about those offenses because you've got John Mateer and the OU offense. It just hasn't been the same since he had that injury. I mean, you look at what they were accomplishing before he got hurt, and then you look at a game like the one against Texas especially, where they just haven't been clicking at quite the same level pre-injury. So that's kind of something to watch for the OU offense. And then for the Crimson Tide, we've kind of known all season that they've really struggled to run the ball, and that was dialed up to 11 in that SEC championship game against Georgia, where they rushed for -3 yards. But now the passing game has kind of been struggling. I mean, they didn't get much offense going at all against Georgia. They didn't do a whole lot against Auburn. They did enough to win that football game, but they've really struggled. They've sputtered down the stretch. So both of these offenses are looking for a spark to get them going. And which team will be able to do that, I think, is the key question. Ryan Williams at times just hasn't looked like the same receiver that he was last year. I mean, I kind of saw that in the back half of last year. He had a really strong start and then wasn't quite the same. and he's kind of playing more like that second half version compared to that first half version of the 2024 season. So that's something key to watch there. I think an X factor here is R. Mason Thomas, who is slated to return from an injury. He was out for about a month, I think. That is a huge addition for the Sooners. He, I think, still leads the team in sacks in spite of missing a few games. So that return is huge for the Sooners. The Sooners as well also have an All-SEC kicker and an All-SEC punter. Their kicker actually was the Lou Groza Award winner. So kind of the edge in those areas. I think the Sooners as well, just because they're a little bit more dynamic. Even though their offense has been struggling, I think they can do a little bit more running the ball. And I think their defense is also better than what Alabama has. So I've got Oklahoma winning for the third time in the last 13 months, I think. Over Alabama, I've got Sooners 21, Crimson Tide 17. Next up, I think this is a game that's even more intriguing. We've already seen Oklahoma and Alabama, and I think that's a case of two pretty pedestrian offenses against two really good defenses. This one is a really good matchup. Now, if we're going to nitpick one thing in this game, both teams have been a little bit inconsistent at quarterback. That's Carson Beck for Miami and Marcel Reed for Texas A&M. I think either one of those guys, if they were more consistent, would have been in New York, but especially Reed. I mean, he led the Aggies to just an incredible season, and I think if he would have played a little bit more to the same caliber across the board, he would have certainly been in New York as well. Both teams have some star wide receivers. You've got Malachi Toney and C.J. Daniels for the Hurricanes. And then you've got Casey Concepcion, who is the Paul Hornung Award winner as the most versatile player in college football. He's also a punt returner for the Aggies. And then Mario Craver. They're going to be matched up, those two guys, against Jacoby Thomas, who has 4 interceptions for Miami. I think that's a key matchup. I'm assuming he'll be matched up against Concepcion, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes up against Craver a bit as well. That's a key matchup there. And then also, coming off the edge, Ruben Bain Jr. is the key piece of the Miami defense up front. Now, another huge matchup. This one I think is going to be the most fascinating one to watch in this game. It's at the line of scrimmage. You've got the Miami offensive line, who I think has given up 11 sacks all season, which is the 8th fewest nationally. And then they're going up against the Texas A&M pass rush, which has 41 sacks, which I believe is either first or tied for first in the country. I think they might be right up there with Oklahoma as well. So that is going to be huge to watch, really across the line of scrimmage when Texas A&M has the football, when Miami has the football and Texas A&M is on defense. The key matchup there, though, to even hone in on a little bit more, is offensive tackle Francis Mauigoa for Miami against Cassius Howell for Texas A&M. Both of those guys were AP first-team All-Americans, and so that is the matchup to watch in this game. I think if I had to go one way, I think that Texas A&M has the edge in this game. So I'm going to go with Texas A&M 31, Miami 27. But I think out of the first round games, this will be the most entertaining, the most enjoyable to watch. Then kind of quickly going through these other games, there's not a whole lot to talk about because I think, the Power 4 teams in both of these matchups are going to win and probably win fairly comfortably. But some things to watch. Obviously, the Rebels are now led by Pete Golding after Lane Kiffin left for LSU. You got a matchup of two pretty good quarterbacks in this game. You got Trinidad Chambliss for Ole Miss, Jake Retzlaff, who can run and throw the ball for Tulane. Now, the key area that I think keeps this game from my estimation of even really being too terribly close is the Green Wave's key weakness is they're 124th nationally against the pass. Ole Miss, meanwhile, is 3rd nationally in passing yards per game. There's not much more to say than that. I mean, you can see the numbers reflect that Tulane kind of struggles against that pass. Now, they've done a really good job of overcoming that this season and getting to where they're at, 11-2, but I think it's just going to be too much for them to overcome. I've got Ole Miss covering a pretty big spread in this one, 17.5. So I've got Ole Miss 37, Tulane 17. Now, this next matchup I think is pretty intriguing, but you've got a case of a James Madison team that ranks pretty highly up there. They're the number 10 scoring offense and scoring defense in the country. Now, those numbers are a little bit skewed in their favor because of being against Sun Belt competition, but they've still done a really good job, both offensively and defensively. And they're going up against number 5 Oregon, who I think is really flying under the radar right now. Not a lot coming out of Eugene right now, something that Joel Klatt talked about. They've just kind of been ever since the Indiana loss, kind of been quietly, chugging along, putting up really impressive, numbers and really kind of dominating their opponents in a lot of ways. They're fifth in rushing yards per game. That's led by Noah Whittington, who has over 770 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, but they really have a stable of backs. They've got Jordan Davison, De'Aaron Hill, and then Jaden Limar. All of those guys basically have 250 yards or more. Limar has 249, and then each of those guys have 3 touchdowns. Now, you've got a James Madison rushing defense that they'll be going up against that's number 2 in the country. Again, those numbers are maybe a little bit skewed, but that's still an impressive stat, regardless of what the level of competition is. This is still, you want to talk about a level 1A and a level 1B, sure. But James Madison is still probably the best in the country from that level B in the FBS compared to that level A, which is the Power 4 conferences. So this is still a really stout run defense. However, Oregon is top 20 in every key defensive metric. And then I think James Madison is kind of built for this in terms of that matchup, especially their strength being up against Oregon's strength, rush defense versus the Ducks' rush offense. And then Oregon as well, their 2 coordinators, Tosh Lupoy going to Cal, and then Will Stein going to Kentucky. That's kind of an extra dynamic to consider here. I still think Oregon gets the win, but I do think James Madison actually covers in this one. I've got Oregon 34, James Madison 20. Now, going through the rest of the bracket kind of quickly, not going to be spending too much time on these games because they're games that I might be previewing here soon anyways. I would have Texas A&M against Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. I've got the Buckeyes having the edge there slightly. I think they have a better defense, maybe a level offense, maybe slightly better. Oregon against Texas Tech. Now, this is one where probably the common prediction would be for Oregon to win this game, but I actually really like Texas Tech. Now, again, the level of competition maybe isn't quite there to what Oregon's faced in the Big Ten, but I really like Texas Tech's defense. I love how they kind of create so much havoc, a lot of turnovers, Jacob Rodriguez at linebacker. So I've got the Red Raiders there. Oklahoma versus Indiana. I think the Hoosiers are too much both offensively, and I think defensively they match, if not better, than Oklahoma. So I've got Indiana moving on. And then Ole Miss, Georgia. Again, it's a rematch of a game we've already seen. I think the Dogs get the job done again. I think this time they maybe don't have to come back in this game, but the Bulldogs move on. Semifinal number 1, Georgia against Ohio State. Outside of that Indiana game, and even still, that was just such an incredibly played game by the Hoosiers. Ohio State's been the most consistent team in the country. Again, outside of that Indiana game. So they're probably, I guess I would have to say, the second most consistent team because Indiana has been more consistent. I think that continues. Georgia's had a little bit of inconsistencies here and there. I think there's some weaknesses the Buckeyes could exploit in a hypothetical semifinal. So I've got the Buckeyes moving on, and then Texas Tech against Indiana. This is kind of, again, a little bit of an upset, but I'm going to stick behind those Red Raiders. I think they have a chance to maybe surprise some people. I know a lot of people know they're a good team, but I don't know if people realize quite how good they are. I think that'd be a huge matchup. I think both of those teams, rank top 10 in offense and defense in a lot of key categories. Can Texas Tech's offense keep up against Indiana? That would be the biggest question to ask. I think they do. I think they maybe force Fernando Mendoza and that IU offense into a couple turnovers. So I've got Texas Tech. And then finally, I think for the Buckeyes, having a chip on their shoulder, they'd probably rather face Indiana in the national championship game. I think they face Texas Tech. And you might call me a little bit biased, but I think they're still, like they were last year in the playoffs, especially, the best team in the country. So I've got Ohio State over Texas Tech in my national championship game. Buckeyes going back-to-back. But let me know in the comments below your thoughts on this first round, who you think is going to advance, and then who you ultimately have coming out on top. But that is all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burtnett, signing out. Peace.